Hey everyone. So today we're here with Dale, who is our special guest. Hi Dale, thanks for coming.
Hello, how you doing? Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. So I think today we're going to talk a little bit about some things that were going on with my case, some things that are going on with your case. And did you want to maybe start by just introducing yourself and telling our listeners just a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Dale Richardson. Obviously, you can see that there. And I'm a mechanical engineering technologist. I got a Bachelor of Technology majoring in engineering and applied sciences. And I'm a whistleblower. I whistleblew the COVID pandemic response on the engineering controls in early 2020. Um, I demonstrated that the guidelines that they brought from the CDC were wrong, and they didn't mitigate disease. So that ended up going into a lot of stuff, and I know on certain platforms I can't say certain words, otherwise you'll get in trouble. But let's put it this way: my life was hell, and my daughter's lives were hell, and I ended up getting strapped to a table and things were very bad, and a lot of crimes occurred. And that was on July 23rd of 2020, and so forth. And so through all this other stuff, I began to see a lot of the furtherance of the issues with the court systems and how they're being used to violate people's rights and tear apart families, because the same judge that was dealing with the one case against the police and other entities were the same judge that was looking after my family matter on both first appearances and used my family matter to punish me. And my youngest daughter, whose name is Karis, where we get the Karis project from, is going to be 6 in February, and I haven't seen her for 4.5 years because the government didn't like what I had to say. Uh, and my oldest daughter, she was subject of unwarranted state interference as well, and I had to fight them for 3 years and got her back after she was a permanent ward of the state after doing some outside of the box thinking, because the regular court system was never the way that they were going to do that, and she was abused quite terribly during that time. And so now, after whistleblowing the government's bad bad activity, criminal activity, I ended up seeing that a lot of the issues with the families were really the biggest issue domestically anyway. So
Wow. Well, thank you. I know that's a lot, and I think that a lot of people have started to realize how deep things really are, especially after COVID. A lot of people started to do a lot of their own research. So, and it's tough because, you can have all the proof in front of you and you can have everything and people to back up what you're saying, but there's still going to be people out there who won't believe it, even with the proof right in their face.
yes, I mean, one of the things that I do have is the level of evidence that I have is astronomical. I have a lot of video, audio, documentary evidence. I don't think there's a single person that has amassed more evidence in a detailed manner than I have. It's just knew I was dealing with criminals and backed everything up and so forth. So there's most of the evidence that I have. No one's ever seen it because I just haven't had time to put it out. It's just impossible for one person to put out that much and process it.
Yeah, and it's like overwhelming because and then it gets to the point where you have like too much and then nobody wants to sit there and look through it all. So it's like it just becomes overwhelming after a while. So I totally understand that, especially with my case. It's like, and then when I was posting so much on TikTok and other social media platforms, a lot of the evidence that I showed to the police and showed to Department of Children and Families and the FBI and everything, state's attorneys, the courts, and it was deemed as not a concern, or it was just brushed under the rug. And so, but then when I posted it on these platforms, people were amazed that, and telling me, "Oh, go to the police, go to the police." And I'm like, I'm posting this to show you guys that the police said that this was not a concern to them. And so it's like, then people are like, "What do you mean?" And it's like, then more attention gets to it. And so I think that there needs to be like widespread attention that isn't being suppressed, so that everybody can really see what's going on within these family court systems, which
Yeah,
are really
what
not courts at all. They're pretend courts.
they're not constitutional courts at all in any country. One of the things that I will say is that once I've noticed with the dealings of this, they deal with men and women very differently, and men and women are very different in the way that they process and relay information. And anybody who tells you this differently is a liar. When they try to tell you that men and women are the same, same people that are destroying the families are the ones who perpetrate that lie, because then they want to place people in very bad situations. When women are traumatized, they relate information a very different way. It becomes almost like not, it's like verbal diarrhea. They just like spew out the information because women process while they're talking. Men do not do this. When a man is talking, he's talking for a different reason than a woman is. And so when it comes down to relaying the information chronologically, it's very difficult for a woman when she's traumatized. It's pretty much impossible. When police come in and ask these questions, and I watch them do it, they ask the wrong questions. They do things to increase the woman's trauma so that she will get into a state where she cannot relate the right information. Then they will just brush her off and disregard her. This is what happens. I see it happening time and time again. Men, it's much harder for them to do this. This is why they put significantly more pressure on them, and they had to pressure them first because men were designed to take more abuse. This is pretty evident. Look at the jobs that men do as opposed to the ones that women do. Men do mostly the dangerous jobs in places where, I mean, women wouldn't survive because of the way that they're constructed. They're designed to be more feeling good. Men are not designed to feel good. They're designed to get their sense of satisfaction from protecting their loved ones. Women, they're not the same way. They need to have that love and security. And so they use these things to destroy people. And it's very disgusting and should never be done. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's an interesting perspective to see that, and I agree with you. And especially when with a lot of the interactions with the police, if you throw in not just the trauma, but like ADHD and other really common things that a lot of adults deal with, it makes it difficult sometimes to communicate, especially when you're in that fight or flight state, when you're dealing with something so traumatic. And when the police come and they're asking questions, but they're being so impatient, they cut you off, they don't let you finish. And then they just jump from one conclusion to another. And I had posted on YouTube where I was actually arrested in October of 2023. I was charged with felony violation of protective order for going to my child's pediatrician office, where they then locked me out. And I told them I was coming. I said I was going to drop off documents and pick up records. And I brought some toys and snacks for my daughter because I called and they told me that she was going to be there for an appointment that day. And my ex had not let me see her for like 2 or 3 months straight. He was withholding her from me. He wasn't letting me see her or talk to her. And he had gotten arrested October 8th, 2023. And he was charged with felony risk of injury to a minor, resisting arrest, and interfering with an officer. They let him out on a $2,500 bond. So he paid like $200 to get out. And they did not put a protective order in place that said he couldn't talk to or contact my daughter, even though the risk of injury was for her, for refusing to let her get medical attention when she screamed in pain. And So then that was October 8th. October 18th, 10 days later, when I found out that she was at the doctor after he wasn't letting me talk to her, wasn't letting me see her. When I found out she was going to be there, I said, "Oh, let me bring her toy, her stuffed animal. I hope if I see her, I'll give her a big hug and it'll be nice." And I had said to the doctor, "I'm going to be coming." They're like, "Okay." I recorded all of this. When I get there, the door was locked. And I'm like, I'm seeing other parents go in through another door. And then I tried to go in through the other door and they were like, "Oh, do you have an appointment?" And I was like, "Well, my daughter does." And I was coming to get the paperwork. And they're like, "Oh, well, we'll let them know that you're here. Just have a seat." So I have a seat in the hallway on the bench that they told me to sit down on. And more parents keep coming in, and every parent that comes in keeps going to that door and getting let in. And it's like, where's the secret memo telling parents, like, "Hey, just come in through this side door and we'll let you in"? And so after I watched like 10 other parents do that and I'm still sitting in the hallway waiting and they're not telling me what's going on, I tried to ask again, like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, well, did you get checked in and whatever?" And I'm like, "I told them." So they're like, "Okay." And then I see another parent leaving from the main door. And I asked them, I said, like, you know, "What's going on? Are they closed?" And she says, "Oh, no, they're not closed. We're just temporarily have the waiting room closed for cleaning purposes." And lied to me and told me that they locked the door so that they can clean the waiting room and that I should just wait in the hallway like that. So I continued to wait. And then I tried to call to talk to the girl at the desk, and they're like putting me on hold. They're not answering, all this stuff. Then I see the nurse letting another parent and kid like open the original door to leave. And I tried to like go walk over there to like talk to them and like, open the door to go in. And she slams the door on my hand. She smashes the door and hits and slams the door on my hand. And so I was like, "What is going on?" So then at this point, I ended up calling the police because I was like already there for like 30 minutes. I was like, "I have no idea what's going on. This lady literally slams the thing in my hand and injures me." So I call the police and they're like, "Oh, we are already aware. We're already on our way." So I was like,
What
"Okay."
what were you there again for? Just to be clear.
I went there because that morning I received a phone call from, they call it the SCAN clinic. It's Suspected Child Abuse Network Clinic run from Hartford Children's Hospital.
Yes.
And they called because my ex had been arrested on October 8th for my daughter on a FaceTime call was screaming in pain, saying that her belly and butt hurt. And he was incoherent. He was under the influence in the bed, refusing to do anything. And this was
So
a FaceTime call that I had recorded. So I got off the call. I called the police. The police tried to ask to do a wellness check on her, and he refused to open the door. So they kicked
so
the door down, arrested him for risk of injury, and then after that, they had took her to the hospital. I don't know
so
what. Yeah.
so you were there to report abuse to your child because there was potential because of your child complaining, and so
No,
you went to the you
no,
went to the
no. So I this day that the phone call happened where my daughter screamed in pain was on
yes.
October 8th. On that day, I had a FaceTime call with her, which was recorded.
Yes.
So during this FaceTime call, she screamed in pain and my ex wouldn't help her. So I ended up hanging up and calling the police and asking that they go there with paramedics to check on her because I said she's screaming in pain, saying that she's saying her butt hurts and grabbing her like private areas. And so I was really concerned, especially because there had been previous disclosures about sexual abuse. So when the police and the paramedics went there urgently to check on her, he refused to open the door. He told them, "I'm not letting you check on her. I'm not letting you see her without a warrant." And they told him, "If you don't open the door, we're going to kick the door down." And they did. They kicked the door down and they arrested him and they charged him with felony risk of injury, resisting arrest, and interfering with an officer. And then he was out on $200, even though he has plenty of convictions, including reckless endangerment. He ended up with no protective order saying that he can't contact or go near Angelina. And then to make it worse, his mother, who has zero rights to my child, ended up lying to police, lying to DCF. She told them that she was the legal guardian. She went to the hospital with her, and that she told the hospital not to give me any records, not to give me any information. So when I called, the hospital said, "Oh, well, her legal guardian brought
Oh,
her here." Not
okay. Okay, got that. But let's
okay.
circle back to the doctors. So you
Right, that's
went
why
to
I was trying to like
the doctors to get your daughter checked out after this whole incident to see if she was abused, to verify
no,
if
wrong.
the
That's
no.
not no.
Okay,
So that's why I'm
so
sorry if it's like kind of like takes me a while to explain it because it's so complicated, but I think it's important that people understand like how this actually went down. Because like I said, on that day when the paramedics came after they arrested him, my daughter was left there at the house with he lives with his mom and stepdad. So the mom said, "Oh, well, my son's going to jail, so it's fine. Angelina will just stay with us while she's in jail." Even though she doesn't have custody, she doesn't have visitation, I'm the other legal guardian. They should have contacted me. They should have told me to come get her, but there was an order that said that he had sole custody and I could only have supervised visits whenever he said supervised by somebody that he chose. And the order became like that because I was accused of lying about her being sexually abused in family court by the family court judge. And she said, because I lied that I had mental issues and I was dangerous, and that therefore now I was going to lose custody and she's going to get forced to go live with him. So this was May, June, July, August, September, October, 6 months almost after custody was transferred to him. And every day she was complaining about pain in those areas, and he was refusing to let her go to the doctor. So I called the police, and the police said, "Okay, we're going to go there now and check on her. We'll call you back. Send us the video, send us what you got." And I did. And these are the police in a dangerous, violent, crime ridden inner city in Connecticut called Waterbury, which is a terrible place to live and violent crime all the time. So the police are too busy with gangs and murders to care about other stuff. So usually they won't do anything. This day, they came there right away because I was so upset. I said, "My child needs medical attention immediately." I said, "The father refuses to open the door for police. I don't care. I want my child to get checked on." So they took it seriously, and they literally, what was the problem was that his mom took her to the hospital. She was supposed to get evaluated for sexual assault there at the hospital. I don't know what the mom did. I don't know what she consented to, didn't consent to. She's not her legal guardian. She's never had custody. She's never had any rights at all to the child. And she told the hospital that I'm not her parental guardian and not to give me any records and not to give me any information. So to this day, over a year later, I'm still fighting with them trying to get the records of what actually happened at the hospital that night. So then I guess that the hospital sent a referral to this scan place, which is the suspected child abuse network. They had my information because she had already been referred to them in June of 2023 for more disclosures of SA. So they called me on October 18th and they said, "Oh, hi, we're calling because we need to schedule an appointment for Angelina to come see us at scan." Even though I didn't have custody anymore, even though they had my number in there from before and I was going to have to tell the dad to bring her, I wanted to at least make the appointment because they were calling and because of what had happened and everything like that. So I said, "Okay, when can you see her?" I booked it for whatever the day that they wanted to book it. And then I called her pediatrician and I said, "Hi, this is her mother. I'm calling to let you know that this happened. Scan contacted me and she has this appointment now booked with Scan for such and such date." And they said, "Okay, thank you for letting us know." And I said, um, you know, I said, "It's now October. Her physical was due in May. She hasn't had her physical yet. Can you please tell me if she has one scheduled and when it's for?" And they said, "Oh, you know what? Her physical is actually scheduled for today at 11 o'clock." And I recorded all of this. And I was like, "Oh, really?" And like, I hadn't seen her. This was October 18th. I hadn't seen her since August 27th. This was 2023. So we're talking 2 months of not seeing her at all. And from the day he was arrested, he said I was never going to be allowed to
so
talk to her again. So I hadn't
so
talked to her in 2 weeks and I hadn't seen her in 2 months. And so when they told me her appointment is actually today in 2 hours from now, I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I would love to come there and be at the appointment. And I also would love to see my daughter. They said, okay, whatever, that's fine. Then she calls me back and says that she called the father and told him that I said I was going to come. And the father told her that there was a restraining order and that I'm not allowed to be around Angelina. And so
So
they called me
that's
back. They called me back to tell me. They called me back to tell me that. And there is no restraining order that says I can't be around Angelina. There is a criminal protective order that the state issued by default when I was arrested in May of 2023 for false statement to police and disorderly conduct for trying to call the police to report he
uh,
violated a protective order on
oh,
me.
oh, okay. I just gotta get this clear.
Okay.
So you were there because of the appointment when they called you from that scan place, and they had a physical at that place. That's why you were showing up there that day.
Well, like I said, like I hadn't seen her or talked to her. I was being deprived of my daughter. I had
Yeah,
stuffed animals and things that I wanted to give her. So when I found out that she had a physical that day and it was starting in 2 hours, I decided to go home, get the records and things that I told, because she had been seen at the emergency room. There was a rape kit done. There was all these things done, and her pediatrician had zero records of that stuff. So I told the pediatrician that I wanted to email them this stuff, and they told me that there's no way to email them. That the only ways to do it are mailing it or coming in person. So I said, okay, well, since she's going to be there, I'm letting you guys know I'm gonna get the records that I want to give you. I want to receive the other records you have from her in person. You give me those in person. And if Angelina's there, I'll give her stuffed animal. So when I got there, his car wasn't there. And then when I went inside, the door was locked. And they lied and said it was closed for cleaning, but then they let everyone else in except me. And then she slammed the door on my hand. And when I called the police, they said they were already on their way. So when the police got there, they were like, oh, we're here because the doctor called and said you're violating the protective order.
the
And they want to
the
arrest you for violating it.
okay. So like a lot of the details are important. What I'm trying to do is to establish the steps of what happened. And this is what my sister used to work for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, putting together cases, and I've given some information over to some of the guys there, and they love the work they do. They used to ask my sister if I was ex law enforcement because the way that I put the things together. Because when I gave him the information, he's like, "I don't have to do anything. I just have to scan this in." And so what we want to do is establish like the steps. The details we'll get in, which are important, but we need to establish what the process of what happened. And so it makes it easier to navigate for the people that are looking at it once they link these together, and so forth. So we got to that. We're at that there. The doctor calls for the because they said that you're violating the protective order. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's why I think it's crucial to understand the protective order before you understand how it's violated. Because just briefly to give you some back info is that on May 16th, um, on May 16th of 2023, I was told that I had a warrant for my arrest for false statement to police and disorderly conduct. And the reason that why was because I called the police on April 30th and I said my ex was violating a restraining order that protected me. There was a protective order in effect that said he can only contact me in the Family Wizard app. It said if he contacts me outside of the app, it's an automatic felony with a 5-year jail. He contacted me outside that app hundreds of times in text messages, in emails, on the phone calls, in person. I recorded every time. I went to the police every time. I went to make a report. The police would not arrest him. They would tell me every time it's not a violation, or they would say, well, we're not sure if it's a violation. Like it literally says, it's a violation if you have any contact outside the app. I would go there with proof that he contacted me outside the app. They would say, well, we're not sure if it's a violation. We're going to ask the court. And then they'd come back and say, oh, the court said it's not a violation. So
I
From May 16th of 2023 until July of 2023, we had the same protective order on each other. There was one protecting him from me and one protecting me from him, with the exact same language that said we can only talk to each other in the app. But it's important to keep in mind that during this whole entire time, from May till August, he continued to violate the protective order. I continued to make reports of it. And every time I reported it, they would not arrest him. They would tell me it's not a violation and they would refuse to arrest him. And so
protective or protective orders, they protect civil protective orders, they're garbage
these
because
weren't civil, these are criminal.
they're criminal protective orders. Did you have to apply to them for the courts?
No. In the state of Connecticut, if somebody gets arrested and they label it as domestic violence, the state will automatically put on a criminal protective order protecting the victim from the respondent. So he was arrested in January of that year. The criminal protective order was issued by the state to protect me from him. And he continued to violate it. And I was arrested for calling the police to report that he violated it.
So
So let that
so
sink in. I reported that he violated it and I was arrested.
so wait a second. So these were conditions of his release then, right?
When you get released, they give you conditions of release, but then when you go to court, which is the next day, they issue a criminal protective order, which is
But
enforceable in all 50 states and US territories.
but what was the conditions of his release?
The conditions of his release lasted for less than 24 hours because then the protective order went into effect. So those
And
don't
what
matter. The conditions of release were only until we went to court.
well, yes, but the conditions of I want to know what the conditions of release were, and were the conditions of release included in that protective order?
The conditions of release were full no contact with no exceptions, saying no contact at all anywhere. Then when he went to court, they had a protective order which had all those terms, except they changed it to say that he can only talk to me in Family Wizard. And it said that exchange of the minor child has to be pursuant to the most recent family order. And it said that he's allowed to initiate or facilitate contact for the purpose of contact with the minor child. And the reason they
Well,
wrote that is because in our family order at the time, it said that we could each, when the child was with the other parent, we could call her at 7 o'clock p.m. So he told the judge, well, if there's a thing that says I can only talk to her in Family Wizard, then if I call at 7 p.m. for my daughter, I'll be in violation and I'll get arrested. So the judge put in that ambiguous language that literally said, he can facilitate/initiate contact for the purpose of contact with their child in accordance with the most recent family civil order. So when I would
so
go to the police and be like, look, he's talking to me on the phone calls. Like I would try to talk to my daughter and he would talk to me the whole time on the phone, or he would
what
talk to
would
me in person.
what was the charge that he was arrested for? This was for the
Harassment,
endanger
harassment,
harassment.
harassing me.
Okay,
That was in
so
January. The endangerment, the risk of injury came 10 months later.
okay, so with the harassment, he got in to be able to continue to talk to you based on what the wording that the lawyer put to the
No, it
judge.
wasn't even because of the wording. It was that they're all part of this like racketeering circle, and all of his friends and family are cops, lawyers, judges. He himself,
Y- 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 Yeah,
he he's heavily involved in a circle of state and public and local law enforcement and public officials. So I quickly realized that even if I make 100 reports, that they're only going to keep retaliating against me. And that's what they did. They retaliated against me by then arresting me after I had reported like 20 different times that he violated it and they wouldn't arrest him. Then on that last time on
you
April 30th, when he kept talking to me outside the app, I had it on recording. I wrote a statement. I showed them the video. 2 weeks later, they called me and said, oh, we're arresting you for a false statement and for disorderly conduct. And they didn't arrest him. So then
do
I
you
had a charge that was open. That case was still open. And since May 16th of 2023 until now, it's a protective order in place that has no expiration date. His harassment case was magically dismissed in the end of July of that year because he went in the court and told them that I lost custody for lying about sexual abuse and that I was not credible, showed them the order from the family court judge that said I'm crazy because I reported sexual abuse and I'm lying and all this stuff. And then they said, the state's attorney's like, oh, well, I'm not going to put her on as a witness then. Okay, case dismissed. And just like that, his harassment
Were
case
you
went
were
away.
you were you were you present in the court when
Nope.
that happened?
No, I was not. And I had no ability to speak as the victim. All of my rights as a victim were violated. And
Wait. So you weren't at the court when this happened.
no, I
What?
wasn't, but I got the transcript
Why were you not present when they came in to bring this evidence?
because they didn't tell me that this was going to be a sentencing hearing. This was just supposed to be a regular old court date of his, and I wasn't going to every single one of his court dates because I had all my own stuff going on, being in law school full
Did,
time and juggling multiple
w-
businesses and taking care of
n-
my house.
n-
So
no,
I had my
so
own
you
case at that
so
point.
you
Listen, listen. At that point, he had his criminal case in that court. I had my new criminal case in the court. His arrest started in January, was dismissed in July. Mine started in May. So by July, when this dismissal date happened, it was just one of his court dates that came up. By law, if they're going to offer him a deal, they're supposed to tell me first as the victim. And if they're going to sentence him, I have the right to know that I have the right to be able to come there, to read a statement, and have all these participation. But this is how they played me. When I was first arrested in May, this lawyer who somebody told me to call him, Michael Hillis, he said to me, oh, I'll take your case pro bono for free. I'll help you because you're a law student and we don't charge lawyers. And don't worry, I'll get you off. This police department who did this to you is so misogynistic and they're corrupt and they hate women. And don't worry because I'm going to get you off and we'll get a full dismissal.
the
So he said he would take my case for free. And he said usually he charges like $700 an hour. And so he took my case. I was arraigned on May 16th, 2023, and then never went back to court at all. So then in July of that year, when that date was where it was the day that dismissed his case, I'm sorry, the day that they dismissed his case, that lawyer emailed me at like 8:30 in the morning. And he was like, oh, the email was like, they're going to give your baby daddy a plea deal to give him a conditional nollie. I would strongly suggest that you don't object if you want to have similar treatment with your case in the future. And I was like, what do you mean conditional nollie? What happened to a full dismissal? Like you said, I don't want to take any nollies. I want a full dismissal. I was falsely arrested and I never did what these charges are. And I'm like, I object to that. I'm like, he has a full record. He's been on probation. He's been to prison. He has a long history of violence and he has convictions. I'm like, no, I object to that. He's like, okay, I'll let them know. Even though, like, he's my lawyer in my criminal case where I was the defendant, he's not representing me as the victim in my ex's criminal case, but he was having a conversation with the prosecutor outside of court before court hours and then showed up at the hearing for my ex. And it said on the transcript that he was there on behalf of the victim when he had never filed an appearance for me as the victim. I never hired him as my lawyer as the victim, and he did all this in violation of my rights as a victim. And so then on that day, when I said I object, in the transcript it says like, oh, Miss Antar says that she objects, and they're like, okay, well, he gives me this paper that's an order from Judge Grossman saying she loses custody, and I don't think she's credible anymore, so I wouldn't put her on as a witness, Your Honor. And they're like, okay, so what are we doing, a nollie? And then my ex goes, actually, I'm going to ask for a full dismissal at this time. And the judge goes, okay, granted. And
the
then
the
and that was it, and it was
w-
granted.
what I'm trying to get at is before you got into all of this, that the district attorney or whatever, the person that was prosecuting the case, when did they get this information? They had to have had it disclosed to them. So when did they get this
There was a
information?
lot of ex parte, off the record communication that took place with my ex and the judge, the prosecutors, the judge, not just in that court, but in the other one for the
Whoa,
risk of
whoa,
injury
whoa,
case.
whoa, 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 whoa. Your ex was talking to the prosecution.
My ex was never had a lawyer. Every time he's pro
So,
se. So he would
so,
talk to
so,
them directly. Yes.
okay. So he talked to the prosecutor. He
Yes.
disclosed this information to you, to the prosecutor,
On the same
and
day that they showed it to the judge.
on the same day that
Yep.
they showed it to the judge, and then
Yep. And
they
it was never
dismissed the.
shown to me and they just fully dismissed it.
Wait, I'm just gonna say something right here. What's happening there is wrong. For one, there's two different thresholds in between civil and criminal court. In a regular civil court, you're on the balance of probabilities, so you have to have 51% that it was likely to happen. On a criminal court, the threshold is much higher. It has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And the family court, you don't even meet the balance of probabilities because there is no due process whatsoever in the family courts. Perjury is acceptable and all of these things, and they do things that are unconstitutional. Even the construction of them are not constitutional because you should have a jury of your peers, but they don't do this. They do ex parte. You essentially have the Inquisition. But that aside, when you're coming in and bringing in evidence, they have to demonstrate that this evidence meets the threshold of a criminal in a criminal court. Because a family court and a criminal court, they're not the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
not to
So
mention the family court order that he showed, that order was on appeal at the time, and I had already had pending recusal motions against the judge and an appeal pending. So I'm saying, look, this order is filled with lies. This is fraud. I'm appealing this. This violated my due process and my rights. He walks into criminal court. Here you go, state's attorney. Look at this
that
order from the judge. She's not credible. Therefore, we're
wait,
going to dismiss the whole case like
wait,
that without giving me a chance to be heard.
you had a charge against him, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so
harassment in the second degree.
you have a file number, right? For that, there's a criminal file for that.
Yes, but they destroyed the records. They
It
destroy the
does
records
it
20
it
days after.
does it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I
It
have it.
really it doesn't matter. The fact is there was a crime that was committed. You
Yes.
see, since you're in a criminal court, Article 6 of the Constitution stipulates that any treaty ratified by Senate, the US Constitution, and any federal laws are binding on every judge in every state in the union. Now, when they took away your due process, did not allow the tests to be placed on a civil matter into a criminal court to demonstrate that that evidence was beyond a reasonable doubt, they violated Article 6. They committed a bunch of crimes at that point in time. Now, because of this, you have the right to go into the federal court, but under a different provision. And I'll tell you how. We'll talk about this after. But what they did, right there, they were finished, and this happens all the time often because people are allowing these things to happen, the lawyers and the court systems, because they're working in that same type of area. They're violating the Constitution. State courts are by far the most corrupt because states have more power and allow the ability to um, push keep out federal encroachment, in
Yeah.
which
There's
they
less
should.
oversight.
But when you look at this under Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, you're guaranteed a Republican form of government within your state. And when the states are, Article 6 of the Constitution does not exist in the United States in practice. It is being completely abrogated for the last like over 100 years, going all the way back to the Jay Treaty. And this is where they began to abrogate Article 6. And Article 6 is one of the most powerful um, sections of the Constitution because it controls the judiciary, and the judiciary is where the person has the ability to restrain the legislative and the executive branches. And so when they've polluted those things, there's only one place to go and fix this, and this is the legislative branch, because they're the ones who have to make sure that the laws that govern the courts are in line with the Constitution and they're not operating in that way, and they have to fix it. And this is what people don't understand. And what they're doing here is completely way off base. And I see this happening over and over and over again. And when the law enforcement won't investigate the criminal activity, because when you're doing these things, they're helping in the commission of crimes, because they're not following the Constitution, and they're violating not only the state constitution, but they're violating the US Constitution. And by virtue of the position of the judge, they're very much liable. And so this is not a light thing. But go ahead.
Exactly, and they're also violating the crime rights of victims and the Violence Against Women Act, and like they say, the victims always have a right to be present. They have a right to be involved, to know of any deals, to make a statement, and they did this so sneakily. And the fact that they had me arrested on May 16th, put on the bogus protective order that said I can't go near my daughter's house, I can't contact him outside the app. Then 10 days later, they make me lose custody in the middle of a court hearing and expect me to lose my mind by walking into court thinking it's a hearing on pending motions and walking out without my daughter, and then being isolated her from all these months. And then by the time that it was, when all this stuff happened in October, at that point, from the end of July forward, there was only a protective order protecting him from me, because the one that protected me from him was dropped when they dismissed his case. So they dismissed his case, and now I'm the only one with the protective order. So now every single little thing he says to me, "Oh, I'm going to call the police and have you arrested for violating the protective order. Oh, you
I
looked at me the wrong way. I'll have you arrested for violating the protective order." And the difference is, I would go to the police and make reports and show proof, and they would refuse to arrest him. But the difference is, when he called and said, "Look, your officer, she's violating the protective order," what do you think they did? They would send 6 cops and a squad to come arrest me. And that's what they did that day at the doctor, because they called and said, he called and he told the doctor, "I don't feel comfortable going inside because she's there. Therefore, I'm going to sit outside in my car and call the police." So he sat in his car, called the police, while I'm sitting there inside thinking that they're cleaning and whatever other lies they told me. And then when the lady slammed her door on my hand and I called, they're like, "We're already on our way." So then the police get there and they're like, "Oh, the doctor called and said that they were concerned because somebody was violating a protective order." And now the protective order doesn't say, it does not apply to my child, number one. Number two, it does not say that I have to stay away from him. It only says I have to stay away from his house.
okay.
And so it doesn't say I have to stay away from him in public. We have been around each other in public for exchanges of my daughter multiple times. And it just doesn't even, it says I can contact him in the app, but that's it. Sometimes the
Wait,
order,
just let me I'm just
I just
listening to
wanted to
what you're.
explain something just to make it clear that sometimes these orders will include a clause that says stay 100 yards away from the person. If that box is checked off, then you can't be near them at all. However, in this one, it was not checked off. So I by me going there, regardless of whether he and her were there or not, does not violate any terms of the protective order. However, I was arrested for interfering with him, because on there it says do not stalk, harass, interfere with, abuse, assault, whatever, the protective person. So they said I interfered with him because I was simply there, even though I didn't see him or my daughter. He told the police that he didn't want me there, so he sat in his car, and by the time I was arrested, he wasted an hour in the car and he was an hour late to the appointment, therefore it interfered with him. And the reason why they were able to arrest me on the spot like that without a warrant is because of whatever statements I made, all of which were prior to me being read my rights And I repeatedly demanded a lawyer. I repeatedly demanded an ADA accommodation to write my statement in writing due to my ADHD and PTSD. And they kept saying to me, oh, hold on, hold on. Oh, we're going to call the court. And actually, I posted on YouTube parts 1, 2, and 3 of some of the body camera footage that they gave me, but they didn't give me all the body camera footage. Of course, they didn't give me the footage of where I'm begging for a lawyer and begging for an ADA accommodation. They destroyed that evidence. So then it's like crazy because then that was a felony case. So and now those both of those cases are still open. And what's messed up is they have a law in Connecticut that if they don't bring your case to trial within 1 year of the day of your arrest, then by law it has to be dismissed. And you just file a motion for speedy trial. And if your trial doesn't start within 30 days of the 1 year anniversary of your arrest, it's by law dismissed. And the 1 year anniversary plus 30 would have been June 16th and November 18th. We're way past both of those dates. And the state denied my motion for speedy trial. And I tried to remove the case to federal court, and the federal judge, who's also corrupt and in bed with these other people, kicked it back to state court. So the state court won't let me modify or remove this protective order. They won't dismiss the case. They won't give me a trial. And so they're just leaving the case in limbo indefinitely in order to keep the protective order on indefinitely to keep me from seeing my daughter.
Yes, and one of the things is one of the issues that end up getting a lot of people issues with this is because they're focused on the details of what happened. Where you want to catch these people is you want to lay out the steps that they're taking, because this is how crimes are investigated. When you get into courts, it's fundamentally very different than when you're laying out crimes, because in the courts they get into all of these different types of things. But what these guys are doing, they're actually laying out the steps of what they've done. So while you're telling me the details, and this is why I try to stop and kind of get certain questions, because I'm trying to put together the steps of the path that they took so that when you go to an investigator, you can say that they did this, 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 and this. These are the steps that they can't walk away from, and they'll panic when they see them, because then this is how they look at crimes, and they're supposed to be asking certain questions. I can show you later on when some of the stuff of what they're supposed to kind of ask when they're doing these things, because these guys are asking the wrong questions all the time. But what I want to kind of circle back before we go a little bit further about what was going on in the sexual abuse allegations that were coming forward, because these are important things to know. Because what was happening with that? Just briefly, how many times did you report the abuse? Who was the abuse reported to? When did it start? That kind of stuff. We just want to get that going. And when did it happen in relation to all of this stuff in the courts?
So, sorry, I don't know where you went here. Oh, here you are. So basically the first report was in October of 2022, and that was made to originally to Department of Children and Families, and then they automatically got the New Britain Police Department involved. And their forensic interview was arranged by DCF, and it took place at the Yale Child Abuse Clinic, excuse me, which is in New Haven, Connecticut. And then there was that one was closed immediately after she stated that she doesn't have private parts. They closed the investigation, closed the interview. Second one was made in February of 2023. Same thing to DCF and New Britain PD. In March of 2023, she had the second forensic interview at Yale again. And then the second one, she did make a disclosure in which she stated Dominic sits on her and has her sit on him. And from February of 2023 until that March of 2023, that whole month, she continued to act out like what appeared to be like sexual acts on her stuffed animal. And when I would ask her, what is she doing? She would say she's doing what the brother does to her and saying him by name. I'm doing what Dom does to me. And so, oh, she would say, I'm sitting on the toy like Dom sits on me. And so that was initially reported in February of 2023. And the detective said, if she makes more disclosures, whether you catch it on video or not, let me know. So each time when she would make a new disclosure, if I had it on video, I would send it. If I didn't, I would just send an email to DCF and to the police. And I sent her like 40 different videos, and she's testified that she only received 6. And a lot of times I would send them videos and then I would get a notification that it went to the trash
Do you
because of,
have do you have record of the videos and records of you sending it?
yeah, I have records of everything. And I even did a complaint later on and sent in a internal affairs complaint, including a whole package with all my evidence and a flash drive that I sent with a tracking number and everything. And they refused to do anything. And so, um, sorry, hold on one second. So in family court, that disclosure in the second forensic was in March of 3rd, 2023. On March 10th, 2023, he abducted her from school and she stated she was abused again on March 11th. On March 13th, the lawyer who I had at the time, Don Cretella, finally agreed to file for an emergency ex parte saying about the sexual abuse, and the judge denied it ex parte, saying it was only granted in part where he wasn't allowed to leave her with the brothers anymore. And then they gave us a hearing for March 27th. So on the March 27th hearing, which is also on my YouTube, the judge says on the record that it's so obvious that the mother is just lying about all this sexual abuse because of her distrust and dislike of the father. And she basically threatened me
Who
on the
said
record.
this?
The
Who said
judge.
this?
The judge.
How did the judge come to this conclusion?
Because the judge is a trafficker. She literally has a pattern of taking kids away from their moms when
Yeah,
sexual abuse is
I
reported.
get,
And you
but
can
what was
listen.
the reason that she gave?
There was no reason. She didn't give a reason. She just said that. And she
W-
just kept saying all these bad things about me. She didn't allow me to show any of my evidence either.
Hold on a second. She didn't give a reason for what she said.
No. She just said it's so
She
obvious. It's so obvious, but she didn't say why she felt it was so obvious. There was no evidence to show that it was
the
obvious, and in
it,
fact, it was false.
in a court of law, you can't use the word feeling. Feeling doesn't matter. It's what does the evidence say? When she comes and she says something like that, she has to give a justification for it. You have to be able to see. Somebody has to
These
go
aren't
back
courts of
and
law. These are courts of
I I
equity that are
I
administrative,
I
so they don't
it
have to
does
do that.
it doesn't matter, right? Like if you're doing something, a person has to be able to go back and understand what they did based on looking at what that information that they have in front of them and the conclusion that they reached. This is
She
what
put me on supervised visits, and I asked her to explain to me, why do I have to be on supervised visits? And she refused to answer. And that's also in the transcript from the June hearing of 2023. She couldn't
so
even tell me why I had to be on supervised visits, but she forced me to be separated from my little kid that was 4 years old and only see her supervised on terms that the father set up, which turned into him
so
terminating all visitation
so the judge is making decisions but not based on evidence. Is that fair to say?
based on being paid bribes.
I,
This
I'm just
judge,
saying she's
yes,
not making decisions based on the evidence in front of her.
she doesn't even let you put evidence. She blocks you from putting evidence completely.
Th-
You're not allowed
This
to show evidence.
this is common. I mean, I've had judges go ahead and after the evidence was filed, they went ahead and disregarded, did all kinds of dirty tactics to dismiss it. I actually had a court that said that I accepted service on something that it was impossible to because they sent it to the wrong email address. And I showed this to them, and they had in the court record that all parties acknowledged and accepted receipt of the change in this document and the change in date. And I said, that's impossible because I never received it. And she's like, the clerk sent me the email that it was sent to. And I said, That's not my email address, and you know it. And I said, I couldn't receive that. That was impossible. And they got caught, right? And then they tried to quickly change it and so forth. The courts are routinely committing fraud, and I've demonstrated this in multiple cases in Canada, United States, not just with myself, but with other people, and showing that this type of thing is happening over and over again. And each person that I come in contact with that has these types of things, you're seeing the same pattern of events. And this demonstrates to you one thing, that this is not a one off. This is demonstrating that this is a well oiled machine, and this is happening in multiple cases, in multiple situations. This is indicative of organized crime operating within the court system. And when you begin to amass all of these things, when you're looking at having such a a body of body of work that is demonstrating the same thing in multiple jurisdictions that are independent of each other, with people who have no connection to each other, this is telling you that you have corruption inside of the courts. This is how you begin to then use the statistics, and you get an adequate sample size to determine that there is corruption going on and that it needs to be dealt with. This is nothing that the courts can solve themselves, because inherently, if the criminals are the ones that are involved in this and you can demonstrate this, then you have the justification to go outside of them to deal with this. Because if you're going to the criminal organization to go out and get justice, it's impossible, because yes, not every person is corrupt, but if they're working in the courts and they're trying to protect themselves, and you're going to be flagged wherever you go in. And when you go in and put your information in, they're going to make sure it goes to their corrupt people, and you're never going to get justice. This is why you cannot expect to have justice through the court system in the regular way that you're going through, because are they going to go and out themselves? No, they're not. They're clearly protecting themselves and protecting people. So we've got this type of sexual abuse that was going on, and the this was he ever was there any ever arrests made for this or no?
No, that's the whole problem is they refuse to arrest him and they refuse to do a proper investigation, even with my daughter making multiple disclosures in forensic interviews to doctors and all that stuff. And like they just accused me of lying while there was still pending investigations open. She accused me of lying without ever seeing any of the evidence. And she's just like, "Oh, you're lying about the sexual abuse? This is concerning. I'm ordering an immediate custody transfer, and this will be temporary." But then a few days later, she changed it to being permanent.
But when that's not the okay, first of all, for one, that's not the way a judge is supposed to go. A judge is supposed to, when you have something of that type, when you have an allegation of that nature, and the child is disclosing it, there is an obligation to investigate. There's an obligation. What's happening here is that there is a refusal to investigate, which goes against reason, because
Well, the thing is that there DCF and police are part of the problem is that he's saying, "Oh, Your Honor, this was investigated by the police and DCF and it was deemed that it was unsubstantiated." So this is what I want everybody to understand. The word uncorroborated or unsubstantiated or unfounded, it does not mean that it didn't happen. It does not mean false. It does not mean the person lied. If I say to you, the allegations are unsubstantiated, that means that there was no disclosure of sexual abuse that they deemed a disclosure. So they kept saying the first investigation, they closed it, saying no disclosure, unsubstantiated allegations. However, the reason that they closed it was because they asked my daughter, "Do you have private parts?" And she said no. And they closed the investigation and labeled it as unsubstantiated. So then he's telling the judge, "Oh, there was a whole investigation and it was found that nothing happened." That's not true. And the second one, they said no, they said it was not a disclosure when she literally made a disclosure. She said he sits on her and he sits on him. That's a disclosure. He's 200 pounds, 17 years old at the time. She was 20 pounds, 3 years old at the time. He's going to sit on her. Obviously, she's acting out a humping motion and calling it sitting. She's putting it in her words, and they said, no, that's not good enough. And the detective goes, oh, he could just claim that they were just wrestling. So they didn't even arrest him. And that's how they cheat us out of due process. Because what the state does now is if they can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt before the arrest happens that this actually happened, they won't even arrest them. And they're
That
not supposed to do that. They're only supposed to do an arrest with probable cause and let the justice system weed it out. That's how the due process takes place, because you could say before in the past, you can just say, like, look, this person raped me. And your statement alone was enough for an arrest warrant. Now, what they do is, unless they can prove it, they do not do an arrest warrant, at least in
that
Connecticut.
see, this is where, okay, the reason why they could go and arrest someone to go in and question them based on a statement is it's very easy to tell when someone is telling you the truth. When you look at a lot of these cases, you can start seeing patterns when people are telling the truth, when people are being abused, and all these different things. And when they're describing certain things, you can then begin to reconstruct what was going on. And this is what happens when they ask certain questions, because especially when, for example, like women are traumatized, like they will leave out key details, but there are certain things that you can pick up, and this is why they ask specific questions so that they can now then begin to flesh out the other details that a traumatized
But
woman
this is what
is
you're not
not going
understanding,
to
is that when you're
discuss.
saying they and you're talking about the police in Connecticut, what they started doing in this racketeering sex trafficking ring is that the police no longer do the questioning. They instead outsource it to a private corporation like Yale Incorporated, which then does a
Mm.
forensic interview where a social worker asks the kid questions in a room where the police and DCF are on the other side with a two-way glass. So
That
before, the police would ask questions, and then the police could do, like you said, telling if the person's telling the truth. And honestly, to be honest, it's not even their place to decide if they're telling the truth. If somebody writes a statement, I could go write a statement saying that somebody from the street beat me up and raped me and sign it under penalty of perjury that it's true. And legally, they're supposed to go arrest that guy because my statement is signed under penalty of perjury. But now, not only do they not even ask, they don't even question the kids, but they outsource it. And then, even when disclosures are made, they label it as no disclosure and close the investigation.
there you have to under when you write a statement under penalty of perjury, two things will happen. Either two things will happen. They'll go out and arrest the person or they'll arrest you. Those are the two things, because there are things where people will say things that are just way off base on penalty of perjury that don't add up, right? And they can't go and arrest somebody because if they're saying something that something is physically impossible to be done, right? Like saying that this person ran through a cement wall that was 3 feet thick. Well, they can't arrest somebody for running through a 3 foot cement wall because it's not physically possible, right? And so there are limits to that. But I'm saying when you look at the elements, sorry, of a case, you can tell whether or not that person is saying something truthful. Like if somebody says something completely way off base, you can't arrest them. It's just
Well, like, I
it's
want to keep it focused on sexual assault, which is what we're
okay.
talking about here, because
So
crime is so broad that if we're focusing on child sexual assault. And
y-
so I know firsthand that the state of Connecticut for many years would have police officers interview children. The police would interview the children with a parent present and a lawyer present if they had a lawyer. Then somewhere along the line, they changed it where the police no longer interview the children at all. If a child is saying they're going to be sexually abused and you call the police will not question them. The detective who investigated never even met my daughter, but she said that she thoroughly investigated and she never met her once. And so, because guess who did question her? A random social worker employed by Yale at the child abuse clinic, where they did this bogus forensic interview where they ask the same set of questions to all children between the ages of 3 through 17, regardless of their intellectual cognitive capacities, abilities, everybody gets the same questions. They're not allowed to ask leading questions. And even when there's cases where clear, graphic, and detailed disclosures of sexual abuse are made, the police then refuse to make an arrest. And so we have a problem now where people are reporting sexual abuse and no arrests are being made, and these victims are being denied due process because, again, it's not up to the police to decide if somebody's telling the truth. It's up to the jury, it's up to the judge and the jury to decide that, because everybody gets due process. So there's a lot of times when people get a false statement. I could go say, "You beat me up," and write a statement, and the police can come arrest you on a warrant. But then when you go to court, you say, "Look, Your Honor, I was in a whole nother country. I have an alibi. There's no way I beat her up. I want to dismiss the case." Okay, the legal system will weed it out and realize that that case was wrong. And then you can go say, "I made a false statement," and get me in trouble. But you're denying these victims due process. You're denying them access to the courts when you refuse to make the arrest. Their statement alone is probable cause. And all you need for a warrant and all you need for an arrest is probable cause, which is an extremely low burden in comparison to beyond a reasonable doubt, which you need for a conviction.
No, that's the point. A statement alone, you have to have certain markers in there for there to be probable cause. It has, because a person who is, like, for example, in mental health, they could tell you something that doesn't make sense, even with regard to sexual assault. So there has to be probable cause, and a lot of the time there is. There's times where there's not, and this is where they filter those things out, and this is
But
why
unless
they would.
somebody is mentally incompetent, their statement alone will always be sufficient probable cause.
Just hear me out. Hear me out. What I'm saying.
And you're saying, you know, because I'm disagreeing and I'm saying what you're saying is not 100% true, because
I'm not. I'm not.
my
But
case,
I'm not. I'm
in
not
my
done.
case, my statement was enough. So I don't know why you're saying it's not.
I'm not saying your statement wasn't enough. I'm just talking about the process
But you
in
said when there's a
general.
statement alone, it's not probable cause, and
I
that's not
said
true.
no, that's not what I said. I said that they have to determine that there are certain markers in a statement to determine that there is probable cause, that the statement is reasonable, right? Because if you can't, for example, like if you have no idea on how to describe a person or have a description of them, how can they arrest them if they don't know who it is? They can't go and arrest until they get
Okay,
more
so that's why when
information.
we're talking, we're keeping it about the sexual assault. If somebody goes to the police and writes a statement under penalty of perjury and says, "My dad, Matthew Lodice, or my brother, Dominic Lodice, sexually assaulted me on this date. I'm signing this under penalty of perjury. I understand what I'm saying. I'm competent and I understand."
I, I,
If
I'm
that alone would be probable cause, right or wrong.
I'm saying that yes, if they can describe
If they
all of that
name the person
situation,
and describe them and they're competent,
if
you would agree
it
that then that meets those markers, right?
then yes, each situation is unique and so forth. But yes, I'm not sitting down and saying this is how, okay. Most when it comes to sexual assault, most of the time it's based on what they are saying, right? And police are trained to do this, and they know when somebody is telling the truth. What I'm trying to say to you is this: is that when people are blocking information and not allowing them to talk, that's generally because they don't want to investigate for some reason or the other. When someone is lying, they will just tell you that, listen, we don't believe you. They'll tell you this, and they'll just throw that to the side, and they're like, if you keep pushing this, we're going to arrest you. That's what they will tell you if they think you're lying. When they don't,
That's illegal,
that
and that violates your rights under the Constitution. Because remember, police are not in the Constitution at all. The whole concept of police is unconstitutional to begin with. And if that's the process that you need to file a grievance and address a grievance of a criminal complaint, and they're making assumptions and cheating you of that due process, number one, they don't know when you're lying. Perfect example. They kept thinking I was lying when I wasn't. And I was telling the truth. But when they're biased, if they don't like you, if you're blacklisted, if you're labeled as a whistleblower, as a problem, then guess what? It doesn't matter if you're showing them somebody doing it on video. Like me, I would show them some stuff happening on video, and they still would say it's not enough proof.
that's
And
not
so
what. what I'm saying is the people, what they're doing to you is wrong. Because when you clearly have evidence, that's fine. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about your case specifically, but I've seen cases like this where people come out and they outright lie. And when the people come out and outright lie, they make it difficult for people who are telling the truth. This is what I'm trying to establish you
But
because
that is the problem, is that it doesn't matter. It's the system has it so if somebody lies, that person still has to get arrested. They still have to go to court. They still have to prove that they're not the one who that they're not guilty. And the fact that they won't even make the arrest in the first place because they say, "Well, so many people lie. So now we're going to have to be
that
careful
that
before we
that
make an arrest."
that's not what I'm saying. What
That's
I'm
what's the reality in my state. That's what they're doing.
Yes, but what I'm talking about is what should be done as opposed to what's not being done. Because what when they bring in the people from the the DCS to conduct investigations, they can't. They don't know what they're doing, and they're not bound. When you're bringing in a place like DCS, they're not bound by the constitutional process. It's a due process. There are different organizations that do not operate under constitutional control. They're not part of the administration of criminal justice. This is why they're farming them out. And they're doing this because people have been motivated to protect these types of things. Because what ends up happening in these situations is that they're protecting abusers, and they have networks of that happening in each state domestically. And the family courts are the primary purveyors of doing this. The law enforcement, the child protective services, the family courts, they are all in bed together and they protect these people. And this is what's happening in your case. And it's easy to see. I'm not doubting that you're telling the truth. Like, I can listen to what you're saying and listening to what's happening and demonstrating that that's the case. What I'm saying is that now they're operating in an unconstitutional manner. You're not going to
Well,
get
all I wanted to say in response to what you were saying before is that legally speaking, in order for it to be constitutional with due process and equal protection, even if somebody goes to the police and writes a statement and names the person as they're saying, "I was assaulted by this person on this date and this time," even if they have no other proof, that statement alone, even if they're lying, that statement alone legally should be enough for an arrest. And when they stop making those arrests because they say, "Well, I think, this one's lying," or, "Well, there's no other evidence, so we're not even going to arrest him," then you're actually doing a great disservice to the victim. And because guess what? That person could end up going to trial. The person could say, "I'm not guilty, I'm not guilty." And then they go to trial, and the only evidence they have is the victim's, which is the witness's statement. And a lot of times in sexual assault, there are no other witnesses. People aren't doing this in front of other witnesses. So if there's no witnesses, who's your only witness? The victim. So if the victim never gets to go in court and testify in front of the jury and show, because look, a jury is the one who's supposed to be able to tell if they're lying or not. A jury is supposed to listen to this victim and say, is this just a spiteful, crazy person that's lying? Or is this a real victim? And if it's a child, or a teenager, or a young person, do you think they're going to be believable? Of course they are. If their statement matches the same statement that they made to the police when they had no other evidence, but 2 years later when the trial happens, their statement is exactly word for word the same, are they credible? Of course they are. So you don't need evidence. And that is my whole point with this whole system. And the police, it's not their job to determine if they're lying. It's the jury's job. And some people might not like that if they're on the receiving end of a false allegation. But the people who are on the receiving end of trying to report real allegations and getting accused of lying, and they get cheated out of the judicial process, is a problem. And what you said before about DCF, in accordance with the Second Circuit standard, in which covers like New York, Connecticut, and Vermont, they say that anybody who works for the state, whether it's a DCF worker, whether it's a person that is a random secretary working for the state, they're all entitled to absolute sovereign immunity because they label them as equal to the state. So if you say, like, look, the state has sovereign immunity because you can't sue the state. So if you try to do, like, you know, Dale versus the state of Connecticut, they'll dismiss it and say, nope, you can't sue the state because we're the state. So then you say, okay, Dale versus Mrs., Jane Doe DCF worker. They'll dismiss it and say, look, she is the state. She's equal to the state. So then, in that same argument, those people are liable for you constitutionally because they're acting under the color of state law, which then is like a violation of 18 USC 241 and 242, where they're using their cloak of authority as the state.
Color of authority is the term.
Yeah, to then violate your rights. They are liable if they're going to call themselves the state. But then they try to play games, like you said, and they say, well, we're actually a private corporation. But I called and I asked and I said, are they registered as a corporation? Are they a nonprofit? And they said, no, they're an administrative arm of the state, and they're considered as a state entity of the state.
So they're a bureaucracy which isn't listed in the Constitution at all. Secondly, when it comes down, they may have certain immunities from civil lawsuits, but nobody has immunity from felonies and treason. Right? That's in the U.S. Constitution, and it's reflected in every state constitution.
You know what the federal judges say to that? They say, oh, well, if you're talking about federal criminal things, then you have to report that to law enforcement and you can't sue for those. That's what they say, and they dismiss it. So then when you try to report it to federal law enforcement, the DOJ, the FBI, they refuse to do anything. So where do you go? And that's kind of like where we're at now.
This is why where Article 6 comes in. And this is, it doesn't matter whether you've reported it or not, a judge cannot allow the commission of a federal crime, a violation of the U.S. Constitution or any treaty
And what if they're
inside
the
of
one
their courts.
violating it? And if they're the one violating it, are they
Then
going to
then
hold themselves
then
accountable?
no, you don't go to the judge. You don't. Who deals with corrupt judges? Who impeaches judges? Who does?
I've never seen one get impeached in
No,
Connecticut, so
but
I
I'm
wouldn't know.
saying who's supposed to impeach them?
The governor.
The legislative assembly, the legislative body,
Well,
right? The
every
state
state is
house.
different. Every state has their own law about that.
I mean, they're supposed to be supposed. Each state is supposed to operate as a little mirror of the U.S. Constitution. The legislative branch is the one that's responsible for the impeachment of judges, right? It can't solely be on the executive. That's not the way that the Constitution works with the power represented in the people, because the people are the ones who basically are to have the power to impeach the judges through their elected officials. And now, when the judges aren't doing the job, they are definitely supposed to be doing their job. Because the reason why this happens is because the people have allowed these people to get away with acting like they're kings when they're really slaves. They're servants, they're public servants. They don't have rights, they have a job description. And it's like the people are the boss, the government are the employees. It's not the other way around. And this is where we have to reframe our thinking when we talk to these people, because they're not there to tell us how it is. They're there to listen to us on how we direct them to do their jobs and so forth. So this is where we have to be, well, we don't have to be rude or wrong, but we still have to be forceful with our requests, even though we're peaceful when we're speaking to the government officials, because it's our rights to not to be violated, and the state has no business using the color of authority to commit crimes, which is what happens quite often. So the judges are never going to convict themselves. Yes, we know that the people in the state houses are criminals, but the people inside of the state houses, they're the weakest link, because the people have more access to them and more control over what they do in their elected officials. And so that's where a lot of the pressure needs to go on, is in the people in the state houses and in Washington, D.C.
I'm going to read you something. In the state of Connecticut, no judge has ever been impeached in Connecticut. In Connecticut, they have the Judicial Review Council, which handles complaints against judges. Between 2006 and 2023, The Judicial Review Council received 1,967 complaints of judicial misconduct. Of those complaints, only 12 reached a probable cause stage, and only 9 made it to a public hearing.
Who's on the
Six,
judicial councils?
the Judicial Review Council, it's made up of like other judges, lawyers, private citizens, but the private citizens are like CEOs of like billionaire companies. And that's it. So it's like all their buddies, and it's like, how can you have other judges on the Judicial Review Council? And I put in complaints, they just dismissed it. They said there's no probable cause that the judge violated any of these judicial canons, when I literally cited with severe evidence, with transcripts, everything, all the things they did wrong. And you're sitting here saying, look, this is wrong, this is wrong. They
Bring up
refuse to.
the bring up the Declaration of Independence. Can you pull that up?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I want you to go to, let me see if, to where they have the clause about the judges. They mentioned something about this. You get it yet?
Mm, no.
Okay. Okay, let me, here, I'll share the screen here. I've got it right here. Let me see. Um, okay. All right, we've got it here. Let me see if I can zoom in. Okay, right here it says, he has made judges dependent on his will alone for their tenure of office, the amount and payment of their salaries. So, and it says he has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing to assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers, and has made the judges dependent on his will alone. That is what we're seeing here right now, right? That is exactly what we're seeing. So you've got them violating something that's outlined in the Declaration of Independence's listed of one of the causes that impelled the separation, right, from the British monarchy. What you're seeing right now is being instituted. If you go through the Declaration of Independence, you'll see this being implemented everywhere in the United States. This is the imposition of absolute tyranny. This is against it. This is repugnant to the Constitution. And anything that's repugnant to the Constitution is null and void. And you have to start sitting down and thinking about, how are we going to deal with this? Because they've given you a system that you're designed to lose in, because they created it to bog you down. When you have the foxes guarding the hen house, are you going to expect your hens to be protected? They can't be, right? So this is where we're running up into a lot of problems, and this is where things need to start fundamentally being changed here. And what you're seeing is what's happening here. We're going to have to go back and pick this up again because we're running up on time here, but we'll definitely pick this up, because what's happening, what we're seeing here, is we're seeing a systematic deprivation of rights and abuses in and when we do my podcast, it'll be when you come on my show, it'll be a lot easier because then I can say things that won't get banned on places like certain social media platforms and be outright. But you're watching a systematic deprivation of rights, and this is a system of enslaving people. There's no other way to say it. Violation of the 13th Amendment, so forth, and a whole bunch of others. You can't do these types of things. And you're supposed to be able to go and get due process. If I go in and bring a complaint in, I should have it reasonably heard, investigated, so that something can be done, especially when you're talking the abuse of children. Family courts are constructed that children do not have any rights. And if children don't have any rights, then neither do you. And this is why you're seeing what's happening to you, because you're like, okay, listen, my child's being abused. And they're acting out. Child acting out is definitely a indicator of abuse. This is a strong indicator because children are not wired to think that way. They're not. The only how they start doing these things is because they're being exposed to this. And now they need to go out and find out exactly what is being done. But when they come in and they refuse to listen to those things, that means that they're covering up for the people who are committing these things. And they're not doing it just for a single person. This is unreasonable. No one is going to risk prison and like a lot of felony crimes just to protect someone that means nothing to them. This is being done because there is a network of these people and they're protecting their interests. This is why it's happening. Because when you see it happening in all the other places, this is the only reasonable explanation as to why it's happening. And this is why people need to understand that it's not an isolated case. Because if you start taking the cases that they say are isolated and start stacking them together, you're going to see a repeatable pattern in each area, each community, and every area, every state, and every country, pretty much in the Western world and planet Earth.
Absolutely. And it's like exhausting, but I think a lot of people are starting to realize more and more what's really happening here. But yeah, I think we can pick up more when I come on your show and we can talk some more about some of these other deeper issues.
All right, we definitely will. I mean, I'll stop the recording here now, and then we'll talk for a minute after. But yeah, thank you for having me on and whatever else like that, and I'll get you this over here shortly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.